sometimes we also bring in other kinds of blessings. And tonight I want to share another blessing. There's a special anniversary. It's not for really any of you, but it's kind of for all of us. There's a leadership group and it's an organization that has been around for a long time now and is moving deep into their second century. So for all of you who are leaders of Hadassah, I'm going to ask you folks to come and join. We have a number of their board members. I have a whole list, but I don't know if I'm going to read out all those names. Oh, look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Don't say the names? Okay. Some aren't here. So, hi everybody. Come, stand here with us. So this is the first year we're doing this, and I think you're going to take this on the road, I think. Going to all of the different synagogues in Boulder, Colorado. So the chapter that's here, you folks have been working really hard, and it's something to share with the whole congregation, because not everybody necessarily knows about Hadassah. Maybe we know that my mother was a member of Hadassah. My mother was a member of Hadassah. There's a few of you. My grandmother was a member of Hadassah, right? I only found out recently that men can be members of Hadassah. Thanks for that. I'm going to have to take care of that. Hadassah is this extraordinary organization, and I also didn't know, and Sarah shared it with me, that its founding, in the beginning of the 20th century, its founding was right around Purim. And so for this time around Purim, it kind of makes sense. Hadassah, of course, is the real name of who? Oh, good job. So Hadassah is the real name of Esther. Esther is the Persian name. Now it's a nice, good Jewish name. But once upon a time, perhaps it was the more common Persian name because Hadassah, Esther, wanted to pass. She wanted to get out and into that palace, we're told, in order to kind of get some kind of status, or at least that was Mordecai's plan. And little by little, she realizes how important it is to make sure that everyone knows, particularly the king, that she's Jewish. And Henrietta Soul, when she founded Hadassah, must have certainly knew this story, but gosh, the incredible idea about living as a Jew in the diaspora, living as a Jew outside of Israel. And when she went to see Israel, still called Palestine at that point, it was before the state was established, and saw the Jews really living in poverty and needing assistance, and her life was, I think she was from Baltimore, and her life was in America with learning and education and opportunities, and she took those opportunities. In many ways was a trailblazer, not just for Jewish women, but for women. It was really incredible. And so it all kind of fits that Hadassah is this incredible organization about how do we live Jewishly and empower women living in the diaspora and having a strong Zionist connection to the state of Israel and the people of Israel all around the world. So for you to do this work, I think is really incredible. And for you to engage the wider Jewish community in Boulder County, I think is really incredible. So we want to thank you for your efforts. We want to express a little gratitude. We want to share a little appreciation for the work of what Hadassah does. And by the way, in case we're not so familiar, it's more than just the tours we get in the hospital if you visit Jerusalem. Hadassah is a leading medical center in the world where there's research and a commitment to treat everybody, Jew and Palestinian, who will come into that hospital who needs assistance. And that has always been the commitment to give care, no matter who you are or where you are from. And that is something that I think most of the world could learn from. But as Hadassah has grown, so has their mission in terms of women's empowerment and talking about domestic abuse and engaging with the rights and equity of women in Israel and in America. There is incredible work that Hadassah is doing. So on one level, I'm going to give you a pitch and say, after Shabbos, take a look and figure out how we can support an important organization that brings people together from all the communities, all the denominations, all the movements, and to provide some common ground where we can celebrate being Jewish and celebrate supporting Israel in a meaningful way. And I think it's an important contemporary Zionist expression to be a partner in the building of the state of Israel and of the Jewish people. But when I say the building of the state of Israel, Israel doesn't need us to build roads anymore. But I think we still can be good partners in terms of building in Israel a Jewish state that celebrates peace and democracy and pluralism, the same things that we yearn for in this country. So for me, and I think that's also Hadassah's message, if you look at it, all of those things are there in their mission. So thank you for your work. There is a little teaching. It's from Psalms, Pitchu li sharei tzedek avovam, right? Open the gates of tzedek. Tzedek is often righteousness or justice. Open the gates of tzedek and I will enter. And I think you leaders here are opening gates of tzedek, empowering women and Jewish women in this community, beyond this community, in America and in Israel. And we need more like that on all levels. So we are grateful, and may you open many gates for many people. And Todah. And may you all continue to grow from strength to strength and be a blessing to this community. So, thank you. Todah Rabah. Okay? Thanks, everyone. It's always nice to acknowledge and kind of share partnerships. And Sarah told me to, so I couldn't, what was I going to do? I don't say no to her. So here's a fun thing. In the Torah portion, the parsha, by the way, is called Tzav. And it's all about these commandments about how to sacrifice. And usually when I start teaching about sacrifices, people are starting to wiggle in their chairs and they lean back a little bit. Maybe they'll close their eyes because the sacrifice is like this ancient way of worship. We don't really get it. We have a hard understanding of what sacrifice is. We think our ancient ancestors just like barbecue, and that was it. But I think it goes deeper than that, because sacrifice and these offerings, here's the hint. Sacrifice and offerings in Hebrew is korban. And the korban, the root of it is karov. Karov is near. So this was the way for our ancient ancestors and for the folks who are living at the time of the Torah to draw near to God. That was the idea. And it was interesting because if you look at other ancient civilizations, a lot of times they would feed the gods in order to stay away from them and they could live their lives. But that wasn't our story. Our story was to grow closer. We use the word sacrifice, and even sacrifice in English doesn't really help, because in a colloquial way, when we sacrifice something, we just have to give it up. But we forget the real meaning is to sacrifice. We give something not up. We give something to get closer. Sacrifice is tied to sacred, right? We're giving something to grow closer. It's like these little children that might give a parent, the tie or the tie clip that I got. It was terrible. I would never buy such a thing, but it was one of the best things I ever got because my kid made it and wanted to grow closer. It doesn't matter what the item is, it's the intention of giving. And that is what we see in this text. We have 5 different kinds of sacrifices. There is really a 6th, and it's about Passover, the Passover sacrifice. But let's put that aside. On the day-to-day lives, there's 5 different kinds of sacrifices. I want to tell you about them briefly and figure out how we can make sense of it today so that it's not just ancient history. The first one is an olah. Olah is the same idea as aliyah. When we make aliyah to Israel, there's the idea of ascending, of rising. You have an aliyah to the Torah, you have an aliyah and you go up the bima, you ascend. It's the same idea. So an olah is the burnt offering. And it was totally consumed by fire. So the smoke was going up, that's the rising. Makes sense. It was totally consumed by fire, it was only for God. Nobody else had it. Nobody else ate from it. It was totally consumed by fire. And it was important. It was a very generous gift that these ancient folks were giving to God. It was a recognition of God's presence in their lives. If you want to talk about God's presence, maybe it's a higher power, but ultimately, It communicates that it's not all about me, that I can give something and grow closer to God. And in this case, it was a sacrifice. And I get nothing out of it other than satisfaction, love, but I don't get to eat it because it's all turned into ash. The next one is mincha. Now we know of mincha as the afternoon prayers, and that was similar to what was going on in the Torah, but mincha, sometimes you'll see it translated as a meal offering. Well, for Americans that doesn't make sense because we don't use the word meal, but it's a grain offering, right? So if you grain and you have oil and there's a little bit of herbs in there, they're basically making pancakes. And this was a gift that only the priests ate, but it was coming from poor people most of the time. Folks that couldn't afford a bowl. I couldn't afford a bowl, but I can afford pancakes. So on one level, this sacrifice made sure that everybody got to participate. Worship was accessible. And there's something else about some humility. The people that were eating it, the priests, the leaders, they got to eat pancakes. It wasn't just steak. So there's a message there about inclusion and access, as well as some humility. So that's the mincha. The next one is a chatat. Here's the idea of chatat. In chatat, sometimes it would be translated as a sin offering. A lot of times today, they don't want to talk about it that way. It's a purification offering. But chet is the word for sin. And sin, we think in America from our neighbors that sin is something really so terrible, but sin is just missing the mark. Torah comes, the root letters, it's tricky. It's the same root as a teacher, as a moreh or morah, right? Same root. The root actually begins with a yud. You don't see that in the word Torah, but yoreh is about aiming. So Torah helps us to aim, and when we miss, it's a chet. The nice thing about Torah is it helps us to take aim again. That's the whole point. If you miss, it's not the end of the world. And God created us in a way that we miss a lot. We're human. This is about carelessness. This is maybe negligence. This is about not focusing on what's really important. And the chatat sacrifice tells us that we have a remedy for when we don't focus. We take aim again. We refocus. We don't have to keep being careless. And carelessness isn't an excuse. We are still held accountable. So sometimes, or maybe more than sometimes, we are careless, and the chatat helps us to take aim again. The next sacrifice is the asham. It used to be translated as guilt. Now it's called the reparation. In most translations, it's the reparation offering. I guess somewhere the editors thought we have enough Jewish guilt and don't want to bring on more, but that asham offering is when we do something a little bit naughtier than the chatat kind of offering stuff. Asham offering is a trespass. And it could be something where I am making a wrong decision. Asham offering is when I'm trespassing into bad relationships with other people or with God. It's a trespass. And again, there's a remedy. You bring an offering. And there's a similar structure to the chatat offering, but you have to pay a little bit more. Okay. I think the important thing is that the chatat offering and the asham offering aren't penalties. They're opportunities to recalibrate. When I'm careless, or if I'm trespassing, I'm thinking really only about myself. And these sacrifices, these offerings, these gifts help me to refocus so that I can learn how to be more generous. Because if we're really honest, we value generosity, but we're not particularly generous all the time. We're generous when it's convenient, like at the end of the year in December. We're generous when I'm going to get community service credit. We're generous when I might have some kind of an acknowledgement. But to be generous without being solicited, just to be altruistic, that's something we value in other people when they do it. But for us as individuals, we haven't really been trained to be generous. Chatat and asham help us to recalibrate, so when we recognize and acknowledge that we're not being generous and a little selfish, we move into that space of being a little generous. The last one is zivach shlemim. And in shlemim, you have the word shalom. Shalom we always talk about as peace, but it's more than peace. It is about being whole. It's about being whole, not perfect. I always will say that. Nowhere does it say that we have to be perfect. God would have created angels, not us. But we can strive to be whole. And if we can find that place, then that does bring a sense of peace. The sacrifice of well-being, of shlemim, is about gratitude. It's about thanksgiving. But here's the other thing about gratitude. When I'm thankful, it's a feeling. When I express gratitude, I'm going to take that thanksgiving aspect, and I'm going to do something about it. There again is that generosity. It's all over the place. So when I'm doing something a little naughty, I'm directed into generosity. And when I have something to thank, that's also a good time to be generous. Because from a Jewish traditional point of view, from the Torah and from the rabbis, everything that we have is not really ours. So we're supposed to be better sharers. Again, we learned that in kindergarten, but it didn't really stick. We want to hang on to it and have a good retirement, and you're entitled to that. But I always think of, whenever I have to teach something like this, I think of the little bank that my kids had when they were little. There was one for savings, smart, right? There was one for them to play with, that's also okay. And then there was a giving component. Our banks had 3 parts, not 2. It wasn't just what we get to play with and what we get to save. It was also a part that had to give. And I think it works so far. Jury's still out. 2 are in college, 1's in high school. We'll see how it goes. But I'm hopeful. I really am. So why am I sharing these sacrifices with you? Olah is about commitment. Mincha is about bringing everybody in and inclusion, as well as having a sense of humility, that every gift matters. Chatat helps me to be aware of my misses and taking responsibility for them. You don't need to wait till Yom Kippur. Asham means that sometimes I do something wrong, inadvertently or perhaps even intentionally, but there's a remedy to make something right if I take ownership over it. And there's shlemim, that sense of gratitude, of thanks. Our ancestors made these offerings, these sacrifices. They gave these gifts in order to get back in balance with God, but it wasn't only God. Because these other sacrifices, the priest got to eat, and so did the donor. There was a way of getting closer to God, but also closer to other people, closer to the folks that were leading them, closer to the folks that didn't have enough, and they were brought into those houses and they were able to eat those meals. So in order to get back in balance with God and bring a gift, it's sort of like how when I do something wrong, I have to bring my wife flowers or cheesecake. Either works for her. Or when she does something wrong, well, this is being live streamed. She never does anything wrong. But it's not just the flowers or cheesecake or the bowl. It's about balance with the people that are important to us, whether in our family, in our house, whether in our community, a wider community. And it is with God, recognizing that we only find balance when we recognize how we might have hurt others. And then there's a remedy. We do something about it. We take responsibility. We strive to be generous, not just with our resources, but also with our words and our energy. But not just with our words and our energy, also with our resources. Now here's why I love being a Reformed Jew. It's not because I get to pick which mitzvah I want to keep, because that's not really what Reformed Judaism is about. It's the misunderstanding. I believe that I'm in a relationship with God and with you, and so because I have a relationship, I have responsibilities and obligations. And those rituals are also obligations. Now, yes, I do have a choice, but here's the thing. For me, a meaningful ritual is going to have an ethical impulse. A meaningful ritual is going to have an ethical impulse. So even if I'm not in the mood, I'm going to do it because it's going to teach me about how I need to behave in this world. And my ethics have to be grounded in something, and that's where I need the ritual. That's where I need lighting candles and reading from the Torah. Every ethical act is going to have a spark of the divine presence in it. Every single one. So commitment and humility and inclusion, awareness of our misses and taking responsibility, awareness of when we do something wrong and hurtful and take responsibility, and showing some gratitude. I don't think those sacrifices are really beyond our understanding. I think we need to think about how we take the ancient way of worship to bring it into our modern day of worship. Because if we come together and have a nice schmooze and sit next to our friends or someone we've never met and have a piece of challah afterwards and we like to sing along, we're missing something. If it's not going to help us try and grow and be better, then we're not really paying attention. If we say, I really enjoyed what you said, Rabbi, then you didn't get it because this isn't a performance. You might crack a joke, but it's not a performance. It's trying to figure out how I can grow, and I want to share that with you. So maybe we can take that away this Shabbat.